morning. So imagine someone paying you roughly $14 billion to send your own troops to a foreign war.
Right.
And the money isn't even the real prize there. The actual prize is that your soldiers finally get to see how modern drone warfare works in real time.
Yeah, it completely flips the traditional script we have. I mean,
Oh,
we usually think of North Korea as this hermit kingdom, right? Isolated, heavily
But
sanctioned.
briefly trading resources just for basic food supplies.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yes. But suddenly, they're this highly compensated military exporter operating on the front lines of a modern European conflict. They're gathering, battlefield data that money literally cannot buy.
It's wild. And since you've been tracking East Asian security trends in your Stylo app, today's deep dive is built specifically to connect those exact dots for you. So welcome to the deep dive.
Glad to be here for this one. It's a heavy topic.
It really is. Today, we are taking a crucial, comprehensive look at the shifting current events in East Asia, specifically North Korea, and the broader global security landscape over the past 2 weeks.
Lots of moving parts lately.
Definitely. And I should mention, this deep dive is sponsored by ProWave AI, and it's generated by Stylo News, the AI-powered news application.
It is an incredibly dense period for global intelligence right now. Having the right tools to sift through the noise and spot the actual patterns is just, well, it's vital for anyone trying to understand where the world is heading.
Absolutely. And our specific mission, the title of today's deep dive is North Korea Advances Nuclear Capabilities as Russia Partnership Strengthens.
A very fitting title, considering the data we're about to go through.
For sure. Now, before we really get into the weeds of this data, I just want to briefly explain what Stylo News is. It is the consumer version of Stylo Intel Aux software.
Which is pretty high-level stuff.
It is. That's a platform traditionally designed for enterprise operations. So we're talking government, military, and high-level business intelligence.
Right.
So for you listening right now, you are getting unique access to the exact kind of global decision-maker tools used to parse these highly complex events.
And our objective today is to unpack the primary pattern of events emerging from those intelligence tools over the last couple of weeks.
Right. We've got a lot of ground to cover.
We do. We are going to examine the consolidation of a new anti-Western bloc, the rapid and honestly highly sophisticated military modernization happening in North Korea, and precisely how conflicts happening all the way over in the Middle East are directly rewriting Kim Jong-un's nuclear doctrine.
Which is just a massive geopolitical ripple effect.
Exactly. And our goal here is completely objective analysis. We are looking at the data factually across local, national, and international levels to just understand the mechanisms of what is actually happening. No bias, just the facts.
So let's start with that first massive shift. Because to understand North Korea today, we can't just look at the Korean Peninsula. We have to look at, well, who is visiting?
The guest list is very telling.
Yeah. In March 2026, Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko made a historic official visit to Pyongyang, and they signed a sweeping friendship and cooperation agreement.
The symbolism there is highly calculated. While he was in Pyongyang, Lukashenko visited the Liberation Monument, and he explicitly used that platform to thank Russia for its assistance in the Ukraine war.
Oh, wow. So right out in the open.
Right out in the open. This isn't just bilateral diplomacy anymore. This is the public signaling of a trilateral authoritarian solidarity between Moscow, Minsk, and Pyongyang.
Like they are showing the world they're forming a cohesive bloc.
Exactly.
And the data shows this goes way beyond just symbolism and handshakes. I mean, we are looking at intelligence estimates showing North Korea has sent anywhere between 11,000 and 20,000 troops to support Russia in the Ukraine conflict.
This is staggering deployment.
And in return, the North Korean regime has earned an estimated $14 billion. They are even planning to open a museum in Pyongyang honoring North Korean soldiers who have died in the Ukraine conflict.
Yeah, let's contextualize that military deployment for a second, because it's arguably more valuable to Pyongyang than the $14 billion.
Wait, really? More valuable than $14 billion?
Actually, yes. The Korean People's Army is massive on paper, right? But they haven't fought a major war since the armistice in 1953.
Oh, right. So they have zero modern combat experience.
Precisely. Imagine taking an army structured around mid-20th century doctrine and needing to understand how to survive in a 2026 battlefield that is completely dominated by AI suicide drones, and satellite surveillance.
That would be a bloodbath if they just went in blind.
Exactly. So by deploying troops to a high-intensity conflict, Russia is effectively providing North Korea with a live-fire training ground.
Ah, I see.
They're actively testing their doctrines, their artillery, and their officer class in real-world, modern conditions.
Okay, let me stop you there. Because when we talk about this trilateral solidarity, are we really calling this an ideological alliance? I mean, or is this just an authoritarian supply chain of convenience? Because all three of these countries happen to be heavily sanctioned by the West.
That is the perfect distinction to make. It is fundamentally a strategic alignment of mutual necessity. Think of it as a transactional ecosystem.
Transactional. Got it.
Yeah. Russia has an immediate wartime demand. They need combat troops and millions of artillery shells right now. And North Korea has them.
Right. And Belarus?
For Belarus, Lukashenko is trying to diversify his alliances.
Yeah.
So he isn't entirely swallowed up by his dependence on Russia and China.
Makes sense. And North Korea gets the money and the training.
Exactly. A massive influx of cash, modern combat experience, and technological exchange. They are effectively breaking their historical isolation without having to concede a single inch to Western diplomatic demands.
But having an upgraded conventional army and, a war chest of Russian cash doesn't solve Kim Jong-un's primary paranoia.
No, it doesn't.
To understand why he's completely slamming the door on any future peace talks, we have to look away from Russia and actually look at the Middle East.
Right. From late February through early April 2026, the U.S. and Israel launched a series of highly coordinated military strikes against Iranian nuclear and military facilities.
And the intelligence feeds indicate that Pyongyang has been watching this unfold with intense scrutiny.
Very intense.
So Kim looks at Iran, looks at these precision strikes, and realizes what exactly?
He realizes the limitations of conventional deterrence. For North Korean leadership, the Iranian strikes operate as a masterclass in vulnerability.
Vulnerability, because Iran's defenses were breached.
Right. The lesson Kim Jong-un took away is that having a large conventional military, or even just a nascent nuclear program, is not enough to deter U.S. or Israeli action. Stealth technology and precision munitions can completely dismantle those defenses.
So consequently, Kim publicly declared that Iran was vulnerable specifically because it lacked a fully realized operational nuclear arsenal.
Exactly. And he didn't just stop at an observation. He has now officially labeled North Korea's nuclear status as entirely irreversible and stated that denuclearization is non-negotiable.
Wow. So he's framing nuclear weapons as the absolute single guarantee for a regime survival.
It's a complete fracturing of the previous diplomatic framework. We have to remember that the U.S., under former President Donald Trump, recently expressed an openness to renewed dialogue.
Right. And you also have French President Emmanuel Macron publicly warning that military strikes won't solve these long-term nuclear issues.
Right, but North Korea is flat out rejecting these overtures.
Mm-hmm.
They are no longer negotiating to give up their weapons. They are demanding the world formally accept them as a nuclear-armed state.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Is he actually terrified of ending up like Iran? Or is he just using these U.S.-Israel strikes as a highly convenient PR excuse to justify a nuclear program he was never going to give up anyway?
It is crucial that we look at both perspectives impartially here, because both drive policy.
Right.
On one hand, the fear of forced regime change is deeply ingrained in North Korean doctrine. The fate of leaders like Muammar Gaddafi in Libya or Saddam Hussein in Iraq regimes that gave up or lacked nuclear deterrence, those are historical cautionary tales they reference constantly.
So the fear of suffering Iran's fate is likely very genuine.
Very genuine. But the propaganda value is huge, too. Opportunistic propaganda is a staple of the regime.
Right, using Iran's situation to rally domestic support.
Exactly. It justifies immense military spending to a population facing severe economic hardship, which is a highly effective political tool.
So whether it's motivated by genuine fear or cynical opportunism, the tangible result is identical, right? That the global arms control framework is crumbling.
It really is. To put the stakes into perspective, a recent report from the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, or ICAN, shows there are currently 10,000 nuclear weapons on operational alert globally.
10,000, wow.
When a state definitively closes the door on disarmament, the stability of that entire global network becomes immensely precarious.
But declaring your nuclear weapons irreversible on paper means absolutely nothing if you don't have the physics and the machinery to back it up.
True.
Which is why Kim isn't just giving speeches, he is completely overhauling his arsenal.
Yeah.
And he's bringing his family along for the ride.
The pace of their testing and modernization over the last 2 weeks alone is staggering. We are seeing a complete generational leap in their capabilities.
Let's break down the actual hardware, because
Wow.
the technical upgrades are just wild. First, the data shows they successfully tested 600-millimeter ultra-precise multiple rocket launchers.
Right.
These are tactical nuclear-capable systems, and they struck targets 360 kilometers away. That range easily covers virtually all major military installations in South Korea.
Easily.
But the one that really stands out to me is the upgraded solid-fuel rocket engine. The specs say they increase the thrust to 2,500 kilonewtons. What does that actually mean for the listener? Like, why does solid fuel matter so much?
That is the critical detail. Historically, North Korea relied on liquid fuel rockets. And liquid fuel is incredibly volatile and corrosive, meaning you can't just leave it sitting in the missile.
Right.
Before launch, you have to drive a convoy of fueling trucks out to the launch pad, stand the missile up, and spend hours pumping volatile chemicals into it.
Which means spy satellites can see you doing it, and a preemptive strike can take you out before you even push the button.
Precisely. You are a sitting duck. Solid fuel, on the other hand, is cast directly into the rocket casing during manufacturing.
So it's essentially preloaded.
Yes. You can roll a solid fuel missile out of a mountain tunnel and fire it almost instantly.
That is terrifying.
It is. When they test an engine with 2,500 kilonewtons of thrust, they aren't testing short-range artillery. That is an engine specifically designed for intercontinental ballistic missiles ICBMs, capable of targeting the U.S. mainland.
So they are drastically reducing the warning time the U.S. and its allies would have to intercept a launch.
Drastically, yes.
And they are taking this out to sea, too. Satellite imagery just confirmed the construction of a third Cho Hyon-class destroyer at the Nampo shipyard, and it's equipped to fire strategic cruise missiles.
That provides what we call a second strike capability.
Meaning if they get hit first, they can still fire back from the ocean.
Exactly. If your land-based silos are destroyed, having naval assets that can launch nuclear cruise missiles makes your arsenal exponentially harder to track and neutralize. They are diversifying their threat vectors.
Oh, and we can't forget the new advanced tank they tested, which comes with integrated counter-drone and anti-tank defenses.
Showing they are clearly applying the drone warfare lessons they are learning in Ukraine.
But what really caught my eye isn't just the machinery, it's who is riding in it. Kim Jong-un's teenage daughter, Kim Ju-ae, has been highly visible at these military events.
Yes.
She was literally riding in the command seat of that new tank with him.
The visibility of Kim Ju-ae is a highly calculated psychological operation. It signals dynastic continuity.
Right, like cementing the bloodline.
By placing her at the center of these advanced military demonstrations, Kim Jong-un is explicitly telling both his citizens and the world that the Kim family's rule will outlast him.
Along with their absolute commitment to their military-first policy, known as Songun.
Yes. It's about projecting an unbroken line of succession secured by futuristic nuclear might.
And he has the internal political control locked down to match. The intelligence briefs note that Kim was recently reelected in a parliamentary election with 99.93% of the vote.
It's a performative display of total state control.
Right. You almost have to wonder what happened to the 0.07% who decided to vote for the other guy in a single candidate election.
Probably a rounding error they used just to make it look slightly less staged.
Seriously. But I want to pose a thought to you listening. Imagine trying to project this ultimate futuristic national strength with advanced tanks and solid fuel ICBMs, while your citizens are facing severe food insecurity.
It's a grim reality.
It's like buying a top-of-the-line $1 million security system for a house where the roof is actively caving in. So what does this all mean for the people actually living in North Korea?
That is the tragic paradox of the regime. For the local population, these military displays serve a very specific, crucial psychological purpose.
Which is what?
The regime uses the perceived external threat to justify the internal economic horror. Right now, for instance, the U.S. and South Korea are conducting the Freedom Shield 26 joint military exercises, involving about 18,000 troops.
So Pyongyang points at those exercises, points at the smoking craters in Iran, and says to its people, see, this is why we need the solid fuel rockets.
Exactly. The regime points to those external events and tells its people that the starvation and the crippling sanctions are the necessary price of national survival.
Wow.
The military hardware is framed as the only structural support keeping the roof from caving in completely.
Okay, so if he has the solid fuel rockets, the Russian cash, the naval destroyers, and he's showing off his daughter as the heir to a nuclear fortress, is he about to use all of it?
That is the big question.
It really is the ultimate question on everyone's mind. With a reinforced alliance with Russia and a total rejection of diplomacy, are we on the brink of an immediate invasion on the Korean peninsula?
Well, if we rely on the operational data from Stylo Intel ops from early April, the assessment is quite clear. An immediate large-scale attack on South Korea is unlikely. They assess this with medium confidence.
Unlikely. Okay, walk us through the why on that, because the rhetoric coming out of Pyongyang sounds like we are seconds away from midnight.
It comes down to separating political signaling from operational indicators.
Okay.
When a nation prepares for a full-scale war, there is a massive logistical footprint that simply cannot be hidden from modern satellite intelligence. According to the data feeds, there are no credible operational indicators of an invasion.
What does an operational indicator actually look like then?
We would be seeing unusual surges in artillery deployments right up against the demilitarized zone. We would see massive reserve troop call-ups.
Things you can't hide.
Right. We'd see the movement of vast quantities of blood supplies to frontline field hospitals and civilian evacuation protocols being enacted in major North Korean cities. None of that is happening.
So all the tests, the tanks, and the angry speeches, it's a bluff.
It's not a bluff, it's a distinct strategy. The intelligence community refers to this strategy as calibrated coercion.
Calibrated coercion. So essentially poking the bear just enough to get what they want, but not hard enough to start World War III.
That is a perfect translation. North Korea is operating deliberately just below the threshold of actual war. They want to exploit allied distractions. They know the U.S. is heavily focused on the Middle East and Ukraine, so they are using this window to rapidly normalize their status as an advanced nuclear power.
Knowing that as long as they don't cross a red line, they won't trigger a regime-ending military response from the U.S. and South Korea.
Precisely.
And there are actually really counterintuitive signs of normalization happening amidst all this tension. For example, China's national carrier, Air China, has just resumed direct flights to Pyongyang after a massive 6-year hiatus due to COVID-19.
That's a huge shift.
Right. So on one hand, they are firing ICBM engines, and on the other, they are reopening passenger flight routes to Beijing.
The resumption of flights is a prime example of what analysts call a phased easing of isolation.
Meaning they're opening up, but on their own terms.
Exactly. North Korea controls the timing entirely. They are alleviating some internal economic pressure by reconnecting with China, their primary trade partner, while simultaneously maintaining their aggressive military posture toward the West. It's a very careful balancing act.
But why is China playing along with this right now?
Because it serves Beijing's interests as well. While the world is distracted by North Korea's noisy missile tests, the intelligence reports note that China is secretly expanding its own nuclear weapons production in the background.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. A loud, aggressive North Korea serves as a very useful geopolitical shield for China's quieter strategic ambitions.
So if they aren't preparing to invade tomorrow, what should you, the listener, be watching out for next? What is the most likely next move on the chessboard?
We should expect a continuation of this calibrated coercion. Listeners should watch for localized maritime harassment, perhaps near the disputed maritime borders with South Korea.
The smaller skirmishes.
Yes. And we will likely see an uptick in cyber operations, which North Korea uses both for espionage and to generate massive revenue through crypto theft.
Right.
And, of course, expect continued testing of those solid-fuel ICBMs and submarine launch systems.
And how do the U.S. and its allies react to a threat that is constantly simmering but never quite boiling over?
You will see South Korea and Japan likely increasing their defense spending and military readiness significantly.
Makes sense.
There's already serious discussion about deploying advanced systems like the U.S. Iron Dome variant in the region to counter the specific drone and short-range missile threats we discussed earlier.
Ultimately, global security in East Asia will remain highly precarious as the traditional frameworks of deterrence continue to erode.
Which brings us to a final and honestly pretty provocative thought to leave you with. As we've seen today, U.S. intelligence is warning of rapidly advancing missile threats not just from North Korea, but also from Pakistan and China.
Right.
At the exact same time, the U.S. is considering troop drawdowns in the Middle East. We aren't just looking at isolated rogue states anymore. We're watching the birth of a multipolar nuclear world.
Because the technology is spreading.
Exactly. The question we have to ask ourselves going forward is, how will global deterrence actually work when isolated, heavily sanctioned states realize they don't have to face the West alone?
Right. Like, what happens to global security when these states actively share nuclear strategies, combat troops, and solid fuel missile technology with one another, just to ensure their mutual survival.
It changes everything.
It's the geopolitical fault lines shifting right beneath our feet. You might be watching the immediate conflict in one part of the world, while the energy, the money, and the technology are transferring in the shadows, building a completely new network of alliances.
That's the real story.
And keeping track of those shifting fault lines is exactly what this deep dive was all about. I want to remind you that the incredible insights, the operational indicators, and the intelligence reports we discussed today were powered by Stylo News.
A very powerful tool.
It really is. Stylo News is a mobile and computer app that you can download right now to customize your own personal intelligence-style briefs. It draws from hundreds of traditional news sources and X to give you the real picture, the mechanisms behind the headlines, minus the noise.
It takes the guesswork out of following global events.
So if you want to stay ahead of these massive global shifts and understand the why behind the what, subscribe to Stylo News to get your own AI-powered news on demand at www.stylonews.com.
That's www.stylonews.com.
Highly recommend checking it out. Thank you so much for hanging out with us and listening to this deep dive today. We really love digging into these complex, massive topics with you. If there's a specific global event, an emerging technology, or an intelligence trend you want us to unpack next, please let us know in the app.
We're always looking for new trends to break down.
Definitely. And don't forget to follow Stylo News on your favorite social media platforms. Stay curious, keep your eyes on the fault lines, and we'll see you next time.